So this is day 3 or day 4.
It's day 1 of the forum.
It's day 1 of the official forum, the permanent forum, the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and we're talking. Actually, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Tina Ngata, and I come from Ngāti Porou. It's the East Cape of the North Island, whose correct name is Te Ika Maui on Aotearoa, New Zealand.
And you were talking in the Women's Caucus and in the
Global Caucus?
The Global Caucus afterwards about what's happening right now and what's the quote-unquote celebrations that are coming up. And I would love for you to talk more about that and perhaps how the United Methodist Church or individuals could partner with you or advocate or just be present for you in some way.
Yeah, thank you. So essentially what I'm going to be talking about is the application of the Doctrine of Discovery and the obligations and responsibilities of states to actively dismantle the legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery and how that is failed and disregarded, and there's been quite a lot of inaction around the recommendations of the Permanent Forum in the past. And so that's sad enough as it is, but there is also a tendency to, these days, to actually regress to a space where they are now celebrating the arrival of invaders to Indigenous territories and reiterating the discovery narrative and re-injecting the discovery doctrine in a way that holds really strong consequences for future generations. And so at the moment, what that looks like in Aotearoa is that our government has invested upwards of $15 million to hold a 1-year-long celebration of the arrival of Captain Cook. It's already being mooted as a celebration of our discovery, and that will be playing out for the entirety of 2019 all over Aotearoa in different towns. And so, a number of years ago, as I mentioned, the Doctrine of Discovery was highlighted. It is the basis for the violation of all human rights of Indigenous peoples. Once the Discovery Doctrine was played out on our lands, our human rights began a downward tumble that for many places wound up in an experience of genocide, ethnocide, certainly oppression, the theft of our lands, our resources, the exploitation of our waters, and all of that was incepted through the application of the Doctrine of Discovery. And it wasn't just a historical event either. It's an event that continues to play out time and time again. Every time you see a settler colonial government that has illegitimately established itself on Indigenous lands, what you're seeing is the Discovery Doctrine in play. And so, as I was saying, I've been really inspired by the communities here on Turtle Island and elsewhere in Australia as well, and elsewhere around the world, that have looked to dismantle the legacy of the doctrine through literally dismantling the monuments that honour those oppressors. But at the same time, we still have these other nations who seek to celebrate those acts of essentially invasion of Indigenous territory and carry it out in ways that include the reenactments of those arrivals. And those arrivals for us were very brutal. They included murder, they included infection with STDs, which wound up wiping out entire populations. They included the theft of implements and abduction of young men or of ali'i or ariki. And so this was in our case, Captain Cook's modus operandi. This is his MO as he went around the Pacific. And one of the really concerning aspects for us is, we recognise as Māori that we are a member of a global Indigenous community. We love our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We're thrilled with their visits to us. We love engaging with them, and we stand in solidarity with them. We experience many of the same issues as them. But when we allow this to happen on our lands, that is something that holds implications for all of them, because he only arrived to us first, right? And then in 2020, it will be the 250th anniversary in Australia when he arrived there and declared terra nullius. When he declared terra nullius, he erased the rightful owners and inhabitants of Australia, and then that began a legacy that was brutally violent over there as well. So we certainly don't feel that it's fair for them to have to experience it either, and we already know that Australia is using our template to apply it there. We know that it will be applied in Tonga, where girls as young as 9 were raped by sailors from on board the Endeavour. It's going to be applied in Hawaii, where people were infected with gonorrhea, syphilis and tuberculosis, and that wiped out entire populations. It's going to be applied in places right across the Pacific, and all of that has implications. When he went to Niue, he didn't get what he wanted, so he called it Savage Island. And he went to Alaska, and he wound up, the result of his actions and his arrival there was the loss of entire staples for their food systems and disruption of their food systems. So the call from the United Nations has been that governments have responsibilities to repudiate the Doctrine of Discovery and other colonial doctrines as morally condemnable and as socially unjust and as racist, and to be investing this amount of money and celebrating them is a complete affront to Indigenous peoples, but also to those recommendations.
Is there something that we can do as church people, as people of Christian faith, as and non-Indigenous people to partner, to advocate, to be allies?
Absolutely. You know, one of the powerful aspects of allies is that you have eyes and ears open to you that are closed to us. There are places that you can get into. There are there are levels of consciousness within your own communities that are resistant to us. And I could say that it's racism, but I can also say that it's a socialized level of behavior for many people, not for all, of course, but for many people. And so even just speaking our truth into those spaces and reminding people, letting people know, because it catches them off guard. They don't have their guards up when they're with people that they perceive to be their own, right? So it's actually able to get in there and have them start maybe tweaking a few different changes. And it might not change today, it might not change tomorrow, but the cogs that you turn when you shift their consciousness, that little bit can result in a really big difference in the future for us. So there's that aspect of it, is that carry our stories to places that we can't go and shift consciousness that we're not able to shift. The other aspect of that, of course, is that this is the doctrine. The full name is the Doctrine of Christian Discovery, and it really was around the entitlement and the obligation of these European explorers, who were really perpetrators of genocide, to find Indigenous peoples on new lands, and if they weren't Christian, then they were able to be acquired as a part of the land that was discovered. And so the implications for that are huge. The implications for Christian missionaries and their arrival on Indigenous territories, the implications for that is huge. It shifted our whole world. In the Pacific, we had multiple genders, and everybody had, at the moment in New Zealand, you are most likely to commit suicide if you are a gender fluid young Māori man. And so you're also most likely to undertake risk-taking behavior. You're more likely to wind up in jail, and when you're in jail, you're more likely to wind up being brutalized or raped. And so a lot of the issues that we experience as Indigenous peoples are really compounded by people who don't live in a way that has been prescribed by Christian colonization, especially gender fluid people that don't fit within the gender binary prescribed by the church, by the missionary church who arrived. So a lot of that needs to be unpicked. And again, within the church, people of the church have the ears and can hold conversations around this and shift consciousness around this in a way that can make big change for us. I think it can really help build some bridges, but also ultimately what we want is for the Holy See, for the Vatican to rescind the Doctrine of Discovery, which they've refused to do. And I think the more of a critical mass that we have, from within the church, that are disputing and challenging the Doctrine of Discovery, who are reminding them that it's still current, it's still contemporary, it's still relevant, and it needs to be repudiated, the better, the closer we can get to that, because we understand this isn't something that happens overnight. It's a marathon, it's a long-term journey. We've been fighting it for 200 years now. We've got a lot of gas left. There's no reason we would give up the legacy of struggle now. So everything that you can do now, even if it means that the change happens for my grandchildren, I'm still appreciating it. If I don't get to see it, but my grandchildren get to experience it, I appreciate it. So that's the nature of the long-term struggle for us. So all of those things matter.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome.
Okay.